Welcome to this morning's dialogue with our distinguished guest, the Honourable Erin O'Toole, leader of the official opposition. Mr. O'Toole, thank you so very much for being with us today. And to you, our participants, so glad that you could join us. My name is Mishka Balsam, and I'm the CEO of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your moderator for the next 45 minutes. It is important for us to come together for conversations that collectively shape our vision. What does a successful recovery look like? How is government balancing economic and healthcare concerns? What is the role of the private sector to ensure future resilience? These are just some of the topics we're planning to discuss. Dialogues such as this one are possible because and due to the partnerships that support us. It is my pleasure to ask Scott Galbraith, District VP for TD Commercial Banking, to provide the introduction of our distinguished guest. Immediately following that, Mr. O'Toole will provide his opening remarks, after which we will be back for our fireside chat. And here's a message from TD Commercial Banking.
When I started Ignora, we had zero debt, but we wanted availability of money. That's why we went to our bank. Even though I dealt with them for 35 years, they said, this is a new business, we can't finance you, we can't do anything. When TD came to see us, they didn't just sit in our offices. They walked the plant floor. They talked to our guys. They looked at what we were manufacturing. They saw that what we were building was a world-class facility, and TD wanted to be a part of it. When TD took over our commercial banking for us, I couldn't believe the level of detail and customer service that we received from them. I can't think of another commercial institution that could help you the way that TD has helped me. I'm Richard Wilson, the owner of Ignora. We fabricate the largest class in North America.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Scott Galbraith, and I am proud to serve the Niagara community as the District VP for TD Commercial Banking, serving the peninsula. I'm also proud to continue to work with Mishka and everyone at the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce in putting on the Niagara Business Leaders Series. It's been something we've been affiliated with for the past number of years and are thrilled to continue, notwithstanding the challenges that it's almost a year, the past 12 months have presented for us with respect to doing these events virtually. So kudos to everyone at the Chamber for continuing to hold these events, and thanks again for the opportunity to continue to be involved. It's my pleasure to introduce today's keynote speaker, Erin O'Toole. Erin O'Toole grew up in a GM family in Bowmanville, Ontario. As the husband of a woman that grew up in Port Perry, Ontario, I know all about GM families and growing up in the area. At the age of 18, Erin joined the Royal Canadian Air Force and completed his studies at the Royal Military College. He continued his officer training in Chilliwack, BC, then Winnipeg, Manitoba, and finally settled in Halifax. As a tactical helicopter navigator, he participated in search and rescue missions off Canada's coasts, rising to the rank of captain. After 12 years of service, Erin retired from the military and returned to school to complete a law degree at Dalhousie University. Erin spent the next several years working as a lawyer in the private sector. Loyal to his brothers and sisters in arms, Erin became one of the co-founders of the True Patriot Love Foundation, a national charity serving veterans and their families. Elected 3 times in his riding of Durham, Erin recently served as Shadow Cabinet Minister responsible for Foreign Affairs and was instrumental in establishing the Special Committee on Canada-China Relations. However, his proudest accomplishments remain marrying his wife, Rebecca, and being a dad to his 2 children, Molly and Jack. Elected leader of the official opposition in August 2020, he is committed to standing up for all Canadians and building a stronger and more united country. And see, now I can tell my kids that I talked to a guy that used to fly a helicopter for a living, so maybe daddy's job isn't that boring after all. Thanks again, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce Erin O'Toole. Erin.
Thank you very much, Scott, and thank you, Mishka, as well. And Scott, I'm proud to be the Member of Parliament for Port Perry, and so I would probably know exactly where your wife grew up. It's a great little town, and I have the honor of being its Member of Parliament. And it's great to be with you in Niagara this morning, albeit virtually, from my Hill office here in Ottawa. Unfortunately, I'm the new leader who can't tour in a pandemic. My first big speech when I won was but I'm touring virtually, and I'm pleased to be joined by several of my friends and colleagues today, including Niagara West MP Dean Allison. Happy birthday, Dean. If this was a real lunch, I'd send a bottle of wine to your table, but now I'm just giving you a shout out as a great MP. And as well, my friend Niagara Falls MP, Tony Baldinelli, who also serves as my special advisor on tourism recovery, one of the acutely impacted sectors from the COVID crisis. I'm also pleased to be joined by some of our Conservative candidates already for the next election, whenever Mr. Trudeau decides to go for one, Christina Waller in St. Catharines and Graham Speck in Niagara Centre. La COVID nous force à rester sur Zoom, mais je suis heureux de pouvoir m'adresser à vous chez vous. Si vous avez des questions en français, n'hésitez pas à me les poser. COVID means I have to stick with Zoom calls for now, much like you are in your business roundtables. And I'm looking forward to using this tool to hear from you on how we tackle some of the crucial issues facing Ontario, and particularly the Niagara region. Canada is in the middle of the biggest economic crisis we've faced in modern times. As Conservatives, we are focused on one overriding issue: getting Canadians back to work in every sector and in every region of our country. But of course, we can't do that without vaccines. Conservatives have been asking for a faster and more transparent vaccine plan since last fall. We led an emergency debate in Parliament on the lack of vaccines and have asked for transparency on the contracts signed and the vaccination timelines by priority group. Each day, the milestones for vaccines move further and further away. Today, we're in 48th place globally in terms of vaccine rollout. It's disappointing, and it's holding us back. As leader of the opposition, I have a job to do to hold the Liberal government to account. But let me be absolutely clear. Above all things, I want the government to succeed on vaccines. Canadians need them to succeed, because it's only with millions of vaccines deployed that this country will start turning the corner in the health crisis so that we can focus on the immense economic challenges ahead. I wish the government hadn't let us down on vaccines, but they did. And I'm worried the same will happen with the economic recovery. Because COVID isn't our only worry. Canada is in the midst of a severe economic crisis, and this is creating damaging side effects for all Canadians. I don't need to tell you that Niagara's economy has been particularly hit hard by the pandemic. Tourism, hospitality, cross-border trade, restaurants, wineries, and so much more have been heavily impacted. 70% of visitors to the region in any given year are from the United States or international visitors, and that's disappeared. Domestic visitors, of course, are also well down as a result of the pandemic. Later today, my colleagues and I will be meeting virtually with tourism operators and touring Arterra virtually to talk about what we can do to support them. Too many workers have lost their jobs during this pandemic. Unemployment in the Niagara region is over 13%, much higher than the national average of 9.4. And in Niagara Falls specifically, that number is even higher. Nationwide, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business reports that 1 in 6 small businesses are considering closing permanently in the next 6 months. That could put nearly 3 million jobs at risk on top of high unemployment that we already have. So we need to get our economy back on track, and Canadians working in all sectors, including highly impacted sectors like tourism. For that to happen, we have to get Canadians vaccinated, and we keep falling behind. Every day Canadians aren't vaccinated is another day that businesses are forced to stay closed, that restaurants can't reopen fully, that workers in the tourism and hospitality sectors are forced to go without another paycheck. That's why Canada needs a serious government that is relentlessly focused on jobs and our economic recovery. That is what the next election, whenever it comes, will be about. Who can secure a strong economic future for Canada following COVID-19? Which path do Canadians want to take to secure that future? The path of an economy reimagined in Ottawa that will leave millions behind? That's what Mr. Trudeau is proposing. Or we could choose the steady and certain path to secure jobs and a strong future for everyone. This is the path Conservatives are advocating, and it may be less glamorous, but after a year of this turmoil, I believe Canadians will welcome a steady and certain road to recovery over the buzzwords from the Trudeau government about reimagining the Canadian economy. It's time to stop the Ottawa knows best approach and the cycle of special access for liberal insiders and the connected few. I believe we need to champion Ontario's workers, small businesses, their families, and their communities. Even before COVID-19, Niagara's economy had taken far too many hits. Factories had shut down, and in many cases over the last few decades, a lot of work was sent to China and overseas to other countries. To counter that trend and to get our country back on track and more self-sufficient, we need to become clear-eyed trade realists. 30 years ago, the Western world made a bet. We would allow China to have preferential access to our market while they protected their own. In the process, Canada and other Western countries downplayed concerns on human rights, on intellectual property theft, and diplomatic aggression in order to enhance trade with a booming economy. And we all hope that over time, the communist regime would begin to liberalize and play by the rules. We were wrong. And now we must chart a new course. But we will also be there to help develop new markets and support the reshoring of strategic manufacturing to Canada. In fact, great opportunities await in the realignment of global trade if Canada can help lead it alongside our democratic allies like the United States, Australia, the UK, and others. And opportunities are boundless in the Indo-Pacific. That's where we have to start focusing. We must be forward-looking and establish new supply chains with developing countries like India that share our commitment to democracy and rules-based trade. We must repair the frayed relations with India that developed under Mr. Trudeau and the Liberal government. Canada must also open its eyes to the opportunities in developed economies as well. For many years, I've been advocating for a CANZUK agreement. This trade and mobility deal would provide a stepping stone for further partnership with the United Kingdom, Australia, and New Zealand, our closest and longest standing allies. Imagine the possibilities of exporting your products to these countries tariff-free and linking up to their supply chains. This isn't just a matter of economics. CANZUK is our block of aligned democratic countries, and at the same time diversify our trade routes, solidify our defense and intelligence alliance, and put pressure on bad actors like China together, not in isolation. Canada needs to realize that the next 2 decades will be defined globally by a clash between the United States and China. We need to position ourselves alongside our allies accordingly. But that will require strong leadership here in Canada. As the father of 2, my greatest worry is failing to leave a better Canada for my kids. I'm sure that's what motivates you as well. That's what drives all of us. Canadians, we love this country, and we know there are greater days ahead of us, but leadership is required. That's why every day I'm connecting with more Canadians and sharing the vision that the Conservative Party has for a stronger, more prosperous, and more united Canada. As we recover from COVID-19, particularly regions hard hit like Niagara, it's time for certainty and competent leadership that's fighting for your interest. It's time for ethical leadership in Ottawa again. I want you to know that a Conservative government will have your back, whether you're a small business owner working in the tourism sector or someone worried about your children graduating from university with little prospects. We need a government focused on getting everyone back to work and making sure everyone can prosper. We are at a crossroads. I know what path we must take to rebuild this great country, to get every Canadian back to work in every sector, and to secure future for Canadian families. As I said, it may not be the Twitter-friendly or glamorous path, but it's the one we can take together, where no one and no region will be left behind. I hope you'll join me to rebuild our economy and secure our future in the Niagara region, in the GTA, and across Canada. Thank you, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for your opening remarks. It's greatly appreciated. I wanted to just say that we've had a high number of questions that have come in via social media, email, and through the chat function as well. And so we're aiming to address as many as possible. So Mr. O'Toole, I'm not sure if it is fair to ask a politician to be brief in the answers, but I thought I'll give it a try to get through as many questions as we can today. So let me start out by one specific one, and I'm going to pick up on something that you had just mentioned. Niagara's tourism industry is highly dependent on the US visitors, and you had touched on that in your remarks. What is your suggested strategy to reopen the US-Canada border? And then specifically, what are your plans when it comes to the treatment of land versus airport borders? I would love your input on that.
Certainly, the most important thing we need to reopen the border and to reopen the economy is the national deployment of a rapid testing strategy. What upsets me, Mishka, is the government was 6 months late in approving and securing rapid tests. Other countries in Europe last summer were using them in between the waves of the pandemic to remain open. We could have approved a lot of these diagnostic tests automatically through trade agreements we had. The Trudeau government was 6 months behind the developed world on rapid tests. And what happened, by the time they got here in sufficient numbers, the government just dropped them on the provinces. It was already in the second wave of the pandemic, and there was no national leadership. So what I've been advocating for longer than I've been leader is a deployment of rapid testing at all border sites and at all airports. And what that will do is, particularly as the US is vaccinating more and more of its people, the combination of vaccines, tracing at the border, and rapid tests can allow us to get back to a reopening, provided that we have that system in place for travelers coming across. The rapid testing deployment has to be federal, because the federal responsibility for border, for airports, for interprovincial trade and issues means it's a federal area of responsibility. Mr. Trudeau has really dropped the ball. The other thing I would say is the highly affected sector approach that the government has promised for 8 to 10 months, that highly affected sectors like tourism would be targeted. There's literally been no targeting, and in fact, only in recent weeks has there been any move on the HASCAP funding itself. So we've said, and Tony Baldinelli, my special advisor, we've been advocating for the last 5 months for support for the tourism sector specifically and rapid test deployment. Those are the key tools.
Thank you very much. There is one quick follow-up question for one of our attendees, and your thoughts on the vaccination travel card, if those need to be implemented.
Sorry, you cut out there, the vaccine.
Yeah, there's a follow-up question on this particular one, and there has sometimes been the suggestion to implement a vaccination travel card, like something that identifies individuals being able to cross the border. What are your thoughts on that?
I want more about the CBSA officials to be able to have in their screening file a set of screening questions for Americans with respect to their vaccination record. We share entry and exit information with the United States, but it will really be up to the United States on what is done within the context of a vaccination card. Within Canada, the immunization cards, the ones like my children have, are provincial tools. So the provinces will make decisions on tracking the deployment of vaccinations and to determine whether 1 dose or 2 dose is going to be the approach they use. But in terms of international travelers, CBSA can work this into their screening questions alongside rapid tests. So we will let the provinces do what they want with respect to a vaccination card or an immunization card. What we need to do at the border, which again is federal responsibility, is that CBSA screening of Americans coming in and the use of entry rapid tests as another verifier. If that's the case, I think we've mitigated the risks down to something that's acceptable so that we can get the economy going again.
Thank you. We have quite a few attendees from the wine industry. And when we take a look at the Canadian wine industry, it alone has a national economic impact of about $9 billion and is responsible for just under 40,000 jobs in Canada, everything from manufacturing, agriculture, tourism, retail, and more. Niagara is Canada's primary wine growing region and is also home to many craft breweries and distilleries. In April of this year, the industry is facing a legislated yearly excise tax increase, while at the same time really being battered by the pandemic and continuously competing with big nationals and internationals. What is your party's position on this issue?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, Mishka. We're very proud of the great grower and winery tradition in Niagara. And as you said, the whole craft distillers and craft beer, it is a real hub for those culinary and creative arts. We're very proud of it. And this is an example. I wish I was really touring. A virtual tour of our Terra later today, I won't get any samples. So that kind of shows that Zoom is not the same thing as being there. Let me be perfectly clear. We will eliminate the unfair automatic increases to the excising tax that the Trudeau government brought in a number of years ago. Not only is it profoundly unfair, in our view as conservatives, that automatic escalator is also undemocratic. Parliament should always debate an increase to tax. You shouldn't bake it in automatically, particularly at a time that some distillers and some producers are struggling to contain costs, are paying more for supplies. So we're committed to fairer, flatter taxation on business, and the automatic increases by the Liberal government are undemocratic and unfair.
Thank you very much. A slight shift in conversation here, but again, there's a couple of questions that have come in on this particular issue, and it's related to childcare. The COVID-19 crisis is having a disproportionate economic impact on women. And at the same time, it has kind of put the spotlight on childcare. And it has shifted from maybe being seen previously as being more of a social issue, that we now are looking at it, that it's an economic one. We need women in the workforce. And what is your party's position on the need of a longer-term system-wide reform to improve accessibility and affordability when it comes to childcare?
Thank you, Mishka. This is something I've been talking about since the early parts of the pandemic. Back when I was running for leader, before I even became leader, I was proposing a massive increase in supports, direct supports to families, as one way of lessening the impact on families struggling, particularly when there was disruptions to schools and daycares and other at-home arrangements that families needed. We needed to provide more flexibility. What's interesting, literally what I proposed last spring, the Liberal government just introduced a few months ago. So this is an example of we've been pushing them to improve their response in some areas, and I think this is an example of that. We don't oppose a federally mandated one-size-fits-all national daycare program that will never work for most families. It won't recognize the unique circumstances of each family and won't work in some suburban or somewhat rural communities at all. So what we need is more support for parents. I've also said, Mishka, that we need to use family reunification in our immigration system smarter and better. Because I'll tell you, family reunification, bringing an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, can actually help give more flexibility to parents, to working moms, to small business families. As you would know from your members, some small businesses, mom, dad, the kids all participate to keep the business going. And family reunification in some cases can be an extra way to support that during difficult times. I've just made some moves to my shadow cabinet, and I have a young woman from Manitoba who's going to be tackling specific issues related to what we're calling the SHE session, the recession impacting women harder, Raquel Dancho. And Jas Raj Hallan, my new immigration shadow minister, is being tasked specifically to look at this family reunification piece as yet another tool to help those families find options so that they can work and know family is supported.
Yeah, we have heard this as being one of the most critical issues that comes up time and time again, actually. And especially when we take a look at Niagara, we look at our SMEs that we have, and we look at the ownership of it and how many of them are led by women in critical roles too. And so I think any support at this point and going forward is greatly appreciated. I'm coming back to Niagara specific issues. So Niagara is made up of 12 municipalities. We're a two-tiered system. Then we have the regional government as well. And a number of the municipalities and elected officials from municipalities have reached out to us and wanted to ask this question, and it's related to the St. Lawrence Seaway Review. What are the opportunities that you see that exist to actually stimulate economic activity? Do you believe that changes need to be made in order for more businesses to open up on Transport Canada lands next to the Seaway, with more municipal involvement in decision making? The review, I think, of the Seaway has been completed, but it's an opportunity that has been identified by many of the municipalities, and they're reaching out to saying and asking me to ask this question of you.
That's a great question. You know, I'll tell you, it's something that our caucus has been looking at, not only Tony and Dean from the perspective of the Niagara region, but if you look at the strategy along Lake Ontario, the St. Lawrence, there's a whole range of issues, not only on economic development, but also on mitigating against the impacts of climate change. Some areas are seeing a water retreat, and other areas are seeing excessive flooding. So we think some specific attention on infrastructure needs to be brought in to actually support that. We've been actually leading efforts, not the government. The opposition has been leading efforts on the International Joint Commission, which you know is the Canadian-US body that helps coordinate flows out of dams and other things. I think we have to mitigate against the impacts of climate change and other things, and then look as much as possible for an economic growth strategy for these areas. And that can preserve some of the environmental sensitive lands. But I do think, particularly with intensification strategies and really the golden horseshoe that we used to call it, being the hub of the Canadian economy, how can we have great land use strategies that let us take advantage of the natural environment, preserve it, but always have the opportunity for an economic development plan as well?
Yeah, I think it's really an opportunity for Niagara, and something that I think it's been supported by many of the municipalities too. So really appreciate your viewpoint on it. This is less a Niagara issue than it's a Canadian issue that's there. But COVID-19, the pandemic, has pushed Canadians and businesses actually to accumulate the largest amount of cash savings ever recorded in our history. How's your party planning to get people and businesses to invest in our country, something that is critically needed?
Great question. And I love how you framed it. If you look at some of the economists' reports, and we've been talking to, there's been a higher savings rate, particularly amongst families, but also small businesses. There's a lot of capital on the sidelines, a lot of consumer spending that is there. That's why we need the vaccines. That's why we need the rapid tests, because I'll tell you, it will help particularly tourism areas rebound. We're actually looking at a couple of specific strategies that will kickstart a kind of Canadian staycation approach to free up some of those funds. You know, it's in my area, and I'm not far, I'm in the Durham region, the sales of snowmobiles and ATVs and all these things have gone up because people are saying, oh, we're not going to have a summer or a winter vacation for several years, therefore I'm going to buy this toy. We can also say, hey, you can have a staycation. The Niagara region, a jewel, Marilyn Monroe had her honeymoon there. What is better than celebrating what is in our backyard that too many Ontarians, quite frankly, have taken for granted? So how can we have some positive public policy to do that once we have rapid tests and vaccines out more? We're looking at doing that to unlock some of that potential. Then on the business side, we're looking at simplifying taxes and actually encouraging investment in Canadian business using a few tax savings vehicles like flow-through shares and other things to free up some of that investment. This recovery has to be private sector led. Mr. Trudeau thinks he can spend away our grandchildren's future by having an Ottawa knows best, we will pick what jobs are saved. No, we need to make Canada competitive. We need to provide certainty to business and encourage some of that capital that's on the sidelines to invest in the productivity or expansion of operations. As someone with extensive private sector experience in Southern Ontario, that will be a relentless focus for our team, is working and partnering with groups like yours and your members to kickstart the economy.
And on that note, actually, let me just say, because Niagara has two great post-secondary institutions. We have Niagara College here and we have Brock University. And some individuals with both post-secondaries are actually with us at today's chat too. And one of the messages that I've been getting is that colleges have campuses within 50 kilometers of 95% of Canada's population, and through their applied research efforts work with SMEs across the country to help them develop products and processes and services to make them more competitive. And most of the applied research funding from colleges comes from the federal government. What part of a federal Conservative government's economic development plan would colleges play? So they're really asking, what is their role? That's closely tied actually to the topic we're talking about, is economic development and investment in our country.
Well, first off, you've got some great institutions in the Niagara region. In fact, my brother and my brother-in-law are both Brock graduates, so I never hear the end of them making fun of me to go to military college when they went to Brock. And then Niagara College is an example of great innovation. Some of the programming on craft distilling and working with the wineries shows the potential of colleges. So I've met not only with the colleges, but polytechnics in Canada. I think particularly as we're looking at improving skills training to making sure we stay ahead of the needs for advanced manufacturing, for example, colleges are the best format to that. I'm in favor of making sure that there's more eligibility for federal grants to the college network as well. I've got Durham College in my community. I have a great relationship with them. And I see that sense that in the last generation, we've almost put university education on a pedestal and we've ignored the great applied, the great commercial applications of a college education. We need to end that. I've even said this to my Ontario PC colleagues. We actually need to improve secondary school in terms of skills and opportunities to make sure that there's a more highly skilled and trained workforce. Because here's what's crazy, Mishka. As a Southern Ontario MP, we are getting temporary foreign workers for some of our manufacturing operations across Ontario. We're not producing enough people with the skill sets for jobs that are in high demand. And we have some areas with chronic unemployment. So we have to do skills training better. We have to make sure that preparing people for the workforce is a key part of our education system, not just a theoretical education, but a practical one. Germany does it very well, and it makes them far more productive. So here's another example of my background in the private sector. I'm going to be pushing for more performance. Unlike Mr. Trudeau, who is almost like a ceremonial prime minister for photographs, I'm going to be a roll up the sleeves, get things done person, because that's my background in the military, in the private sector, as a volunteer and as a minister. It's let's get things done.
Thank you. And actually, I think it's a good time to recognize that actually many of the public policies that the government has actually established and released over the last 12 months have been actually quite effective, and we're very thankful for it. One of the main ones that we hear from our members is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy has been really welcomed, and the Highly Affected Sector Credit Availability Program is another one. In some conversations that you've had, you've noted concerns about the cost of the government of Canada's COVID relief spending. What specifically would you cut to bring costs down? Or another way to look at it, what are some of the measures that you feel maybe that the current government has not addressed?
Well, that's a great question. And let me use an example of how the Conservatives have approached this crisis. I canceled my leadership campaign in the midst of the crisis and actually volunteered to help the government in a joint cabinet. I'll always put my country first. In fact, it was Conservatives, including myself, that fixed the wage subsidy. The Trudeau government announced a 10% wage subsidy. That wasn't going to save a single job. And in fact, the reason we had more people, 8 million plus on CERB, is because they fumbled the wage subsidy. We needed, as I said at the time, to put jobs into hibernation, and you needed a wage subsidy of 70, 75% to do that. I will give the government credit. After we pushed, they listened, and they brought another emergency bill back and fixed it. But they also didn't have parameters on the CERB, and we're seeing mistakes that were made. Some of that I'll give them grace for. But we spent $10 billion giving the CERB to students with no dependents. In fact, hundreds of millions were spent on people who were 15 living at home. That is dumb policy. People that are dependents still living with their parents aren't vulnerable in the time of a pandemic. But small businesses, including some in the Durham region that are already insolvent, families were failing because we didn't allocate the government spending as efficiently as we should have. HASCAP is a great example. We've supported that. It took the government months to release the basic criteria, and now months more to unlock that credit availability. Businesses need certainty and speed. And I know this having worked in the private sector for Procter & Gamble, one of the best managed companies in the world. That is what we need to do to show that confidence in the private sector. So I think some of the spending and some of the programs have been good. I like to think the Conservatives, we've helped improve them. But I will tell you, right now in the Trudeau cabinet, there is literally no one with private sector experience that will be focused on partnering with businesses and employers in the Niagara region to kickstart the economy. Not only do I have that as Conservative leader, Tony Baldinelli, my special advisor from the Niagara region, has experience in tourism. We have a new COVID economic recovery shadow minister, James Cumming. We have a jobs and industry, Pierre Poilievre. We are in all hands on deck planning now for the recovery because we can't afford to be in 48th place in the economic reopening tables in a few months.
And this specific topic is directly linked with the federal deficit that we're looking at. And something that when we talk to business audience and when we look at our members, is something that is of great concern to them, is that this year alone, it's maybe approaching $400 billion. What are your specific plans to manage it, and over what period of time are you trying to really bring it back into control?
An important question, thank you. And Mishka, I've talked about this since I became leader. With the size of the deficit, as you said, in the $400 billion range, we need to have a plan to bring it back to a balance or fiscal balance of about a decade. Why that is because we will need to roll down the emergency funding in a way that's equitable, that doesn't leave people behind. And as I've said several times in this call, some highly impacted sectors like tourism will need additional support upfront. We've been advocating for 6 months to partner and support some loans and support for airlines for tourism. And the Trudeau government has been delaying and delaying and delaying. There's been thousands of layoffs that might have been avoided had there been certainty earlier. So in the first few years of recovery, we will need to have some supports to preserve jobs and economic activity. And this is what will be key and the big difference between us. We want every sector in every region of the country to bounce back from COVID. We can't use this crisis, as Mr. Trudeau says, to reimagine the economy, build back better. When he says build back better, that means what his small group of advisors decide. So they will say what jobs they value and what jobs they don't, what areas get assistance and what don't. A few years ago, Mr. Trudeau said in southwestern Ontario that Ontario needed to move past manufacturing. You know, someone who has never worked in the private sector telling tens of thousands of families, you're passé. That's not the case. I value any job that provides for a family. And right now, recovering from COVID, we need all hands on deck. So that will be our approach. And if we have high employment, that means there's jobs to return to as we roll down the CERB and the wage subsidy and support programs in a way that's fair. We then have the economy growing. We have people paying taxes and contributing to help us get our fiscal house in order. That will be our relentless focus. And I'll tell you what, as a lawyer, I worked on restructurings of companies, including the restructuring of Air Canada. If you restructure, if you save those jobs, you preserve the jobs, the pensions, the supply networks, and the economic activity for when the economy is better, that business has survived and will then thrive. That will be our priority number one, is securing that future.
I'm conscious of the time, and so I thought as my last question of it is this unusual time we're finding ourselves in over the last year. There's lessons that we've learned, lessons we weren't prepared to learn probably, but that we have learned. What do you see are some of the lessons that we've learned so we are better prepared, we are more resilient as an economy, as a community moving forward?
Well, thank you. There's a few personal lessons I think we've all learned. I've used the time to value my time with my kids more. You know, having been a politician for a few years and a corporate lawyer before that, I've had busy careers. And the one bright spot for our family has been a little bit more time together. You know, I watched the Super Bowl with my 14-year-old daughter. A year before, I was watching the Super Bowl in British Columbia as part of a leadership race. So I'm thankful for that family time. The other thing we have to learn, Mishka, as a country, is we can never be flat-footed again. In fact, last March and April, I was working with the Ford government. I was working and recommending things to the Trudeau government to bring mask manufacturing from China to Ontario, to get domestic capacity for medical supplies, for vaccines. We have to have self-reliance and capacity here so that we're never caught behind again. And I've also been very clear about China and the need to onshore some strategic industries like we do with defense and security. We need to realign some of these global trade patterns to ensure that we keep domestic capacity and some jobs and productivity from that, and that we don't let bad actors of the world who have no respect for human rights, for transparency, for emission reduction, that they don't get to benefit from the rules-based global system while they violate the values that the democratic countries adhere to. Today, we're debating the fact that a genocide is taking place in China, and Mr. Trudeau's reluctant to say that, despite the fact our allies are saying it. So let's make sure Canada is more prepared at home to provide a quick response for our people.
Thank you very much. It is 10:45, so thank you very much for being with us today. We're grateful that you shared your plan with us, and we look forward to the day where we can have a conversation in person right here in Niagara. And my thanks also go to TD Commercial Banking for being our partner in this morning's dialogue. And to everyone who attended, please know that this conversation has been recorded and will be available on our website at gncc.ca and will be emailed to all participants directly. And on that note, my personal thanks to you, Erin, for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mishka. I look forward to being there in person so that my next wine tour involves a sample. And I want to send best wishes of health and prosperity and success to you and to all your members. Thank you for the opportunity.
Cheers to that. Thank you.
Thank you.